Hello, this is Nicole Spohr for Spellbinders. Today I'm sharing a trio of thank you cards that feature layered tone-on-tone new classics backgrounds. All three cards feature these layered backgrounds created only with cardstock and the new classics dies. I'm using the following dies to create my card backgrounds today: the Nestabilities, Fancy Edged Rectangles Etched dies, the Fancy Edged Circles Etched dies, and the Fancy Edged Ovals Etched dies. These dies, when stacked together, create awesome backgrounds. Off camera, I die cut several layers using the Fancy Edged Rectangles die collection, and I'm doing a tone-on-tone look for each of my cards today. Right now I'm showing you which dies I used to die cut all of these layers. Now I did end up die cutting the two smallest dies from this collection after I originally layered all these pieces, and that's because I really felt like it needed a little bit more. You'll see that here in just a little bit with the finished card. Now I'm going to go ahead and stack and adhere all of these together before adding them to my card. Instead of adding them directly to the center of the card, which you definitely can do, I'm going to be layering or adding all of these elements, these layered elements, to my background kind of at odd angles and off of the edges, and really creating a decorative background. So a very interesting cardstock layered background for each set of cards. Now I'm going to grab my scissors here, and then I'm going to take my white top fold card base, and my card, or my layered etched rectangles rather, are going to be adhered kind of at an angle at the top of the card. And I want to really be conscious of how I trim off this excess piece, because you can use these leftover pieces to fill in the rest of the card. In fact, my first card features the leftover pieces all from one layering element. So just from this single rectangle that I layered. The other cards are going to feature a few additional pieces that I had to layer to get enough to fill in everything, but this first card only features that one stack of rectangles. Now I'm trimming off all of the excess, making sure the edges are nice and clean, and I'm purposely using scissors with really long blades. It helps get a nice clean cut. So there is that awesome little piece along the upper left corner and right, or the top of the card and the left side of the card. And then I'm going to fill in with my other two pieces. Now some of the smaller pieces may have fallen off, and we just need to piece that back together. And I'm going to use some glue dots instead of my tape runner to add those little pieces here. And that fills in the background so awesome. Really, really pretty, very easy, and super easy to create a quick background. You could do a whole bunch of these in different color combinations very, very easily. Do all your die cutting at once, do all your adhering with your tape runner at once, and then add them all to the card bases. Now, in addition to this, I'm going to do a little die cutting with the Thanks Expressions stamp and die set. And what I did was I picked one color of cardstock that I used in my design. I used 5 colors of cardstock for each card. I die cut the word thanks 3 times, glued it one on top of another, and then I die cut the shadow for the word thanks from vellum, and we're going to glue that stack of cardstock to the vellum outline and then attach this to our card. Now this card, where we're applying the word, is fairly flat already, so I'm just going to use liquid glue hidden back behind the cardstock pieces to glue this down in place. If the stacks get pretty high, I'm going to be showing you how to use a little foam adhesive back behind the die cut word so that it lays a little bit nicer on the card. I'm using these thin foam adhesive strips because I stamped an additional sentiment on some dark gray cardstock, trimmed it into a thin strip after embossing it with white embossing powder, and then I'm adding this to the card. And that's really going to kind of finish off the design. We'll add those 2 additional rectangles to that largest panel, and that's really going to finish that off and make the design complete. So lots of different rectangles and lots of sizes here. And there's a look at the finished card. My next card features the fancy edged circles. Same thing, we're just using a different color palette, some deeper blues, a lot of purples here. The one blue almost has a little bit of a purple feel to it. And stacking these, and instead of stacking them exactly in the center, I did them a little bit kind of more to one side than another to add a little added interest. And I love how the smallest scalloped circle there almost looks like a flower. So we'll add a little bit of some Nuvo crystal drops in Simply White to the center to finish those off. Now this is a design where the circles are stacked where the greeting goes. It's a little bit thicker. So I'm being kind of very careful, I guess, where I'm going to add my little thin adhesive strips to some of the areas, and then I'll put liquid adhesive on anything that is going to be adhered over what is already sticking up a little bit higher. But this is going to make the greeting lay a lot flatter. And I like to put acrylic blocks on top to hold it nice and flat while that liquid adhesive dries. However, the foam adhesive is going to just help everything lay nicely. I'm going to add a couple more small stacks of the fancy edged circles to that bottom right corner and top left. And I also added that little sentiment strip you can see there, just like I did with the first card design, trimming off any excess that's hanging over the edge of the card, making sure to fill in that entire background. Now this one required a little bit more die cutting than that first card, but I love how the background looks with all of these awesome fancy edged circles. And we're going to add just 3 of these Nuvo crystal drops in the Simply White, that's that nice opaque gloss white, to the center of those. So there's a look at my first 2 cards. My final card is going to feature the fancy etched ovals in another color palette. This is more mints and greens, and very much the same as the other 2 cards, except that there's going to be quite a few more ovals, kind of more similar to the circle card, as far as having to create a couple more stacks, I guess I want to say. And what I ended up doing here is I only needed 2 stacks. So my first card features only 1 rectangle stack, and I used the excess pieces to fill in the open spaces, any of that white space. The circle card featured quite a few circles, lots of those. Now you can see there's a pretty big chunk off the top of this oval section that I'm going to be trimming off. And that is going to go along the bottom edge of the card. The only areas we really have left to fill in are the 2 sides. And on those 2 sides, I'm going to create another stack, and we'll use just that stack, and it's going to be a little bit smaller. Instead of creating such a big one, I'm going to create one that's a little bit smaller, and we can kind of cut it in 2 and use those 2 stack pieces on either side. And that's going to fill in the white space perfectly. Again, we're going to add the sentiment, the same sentiment that we've used on all 3, that Thanks Expressions die cut sentiment, 3 of those stacked together, adhered to the vellum, and then we're going to have another little sentiment strip underneath. I just switched up the sentiment strip on all 3 cards. Everything else is really exactly the same. Just cut through that excess piece there. Make sure everything is nice and secure. You just want to make sure none of those little tiny pieces that you've trimmed off fall off. So if they need a little extra adhesive, it's a great time to put a little dab of glue, like that little tiny piece from this layer. And we're just going to glue that down with some Ranger Multi-Matte Medium. I moved it into place with the tool-in-one and let that dry all the way. And just like the purple themed card, this thank you word is going to go over a few more layers, so we need to add some little foam adhesive strips to the back of this one as well, so that it lays a little bit nicer on the card. These thin foam adhesive strips work perfect for this. They hide nicely back behind the cardstock areas. I love using these for the little sentiment strips as well, but they work fantastic for hiding back behind here. You just need to be a little bit careful where you have it. You don't want it to show through any of the vellum. Just check and make sure. Need a couple more little pieces in a couple of areas. We'll pull off all the backing paper and then pop this one in place. The last thing we have to do for this card is to add that sentiment strip. This one is going to read, "For all you do." We'll stamp that on some dark gray cardstock with an embossing ink, heat emboss with white embossing powder, trim it into a thin strip, and then pop it in place on the card. I hope these cards have inspired you to try your own layered tone-on-tone backgrounds using some of the new classics dies. If you have any questions about these cards, please leave them in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to the Spellbinders YouTube channel for more instructional videos. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.